An elderly black woman walks into a busy cafe, hoping for a quiet moment to enjoy her tea. But instead of kindness, she's met with cold stares and an owner who forces her out in front of everyone. Humiliated, she quietly leaves, unaware that someone powerful is watching her every move. What happens next will leave you speechless and might just restore your faith in humanity. Welcome my YouTube channel Story Time. The sun rose over the quaint town of Brookhaven, painting the skies in shades of orange and pink. On Maple Street, the local cafe buzzed with its usual morning crowd. Peter, the cafe owner, moved briskly behind the counter, greeting customers with forced politeness. Peter had built his cafe over the years, attracting regulars and new visitors. Yet, he harbored biases that often revealed themselves in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. Martha, a kind-hearted elderly black woman, entered the cafe that morning, clutching her well-worn handbag. She had spent the early hours at her local church, helping with the weekly food drive. Though her life was modest, she often treated herself to a cup of tea and a small snack as a little luxury. She walked to the counter, her soft smile radiating warmth. "Good morning, young man," she greeted Peter. Peter barely looked up from the register. "What do you need?" he asked curtly, his tone devoid of the friendliness he reserved for other patrons. Martha hesitated, sensing his coldness, but she remained polite. "I'd like a cup of tea and a croissant, please." Peter prepared her order quickly, setting it on the counter without a word. Martha paid, thanked him, and found a seat by the window. She took her time sipping her tea, gazing out at the bustling street. She loved watching the world go by, a moment of peace in her otherwise busy life. But not everyone in the cafe was as peaceful. A few patrons exchanged whispers and glances in her direction. Some shifted uncomfortably, as though her presence disrupted the cafe's atmosphere. Peter noticed this and grew increasingly agitated. He prided himself on keeping his cafe comfortable for his regular customers, and Martha's presence, in his mind, disrupted that image. When a well-dressed young couple entered and looked around for a seat, Peter saw his chance. He approached Martha with an air of authority. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "you've been here long enough. We need this table for other customers." Martha looked up, startled. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm almost done." Peter interrupted. "I'm sorry, but we're busy, and you've had plenty of time." Martha's hands trembled as she gathered her belongings. The humiliation stung, but she maintained her dignity. "Of course. I'm sorry for taking up space," she said softly, her voice barely audible. As she walked out, the cafe buzzed with uncomfortable silence. Some patrons glanced at Peter, others avoided eye contact altogether. Outside, Martha paused on the sidewalk, drawing a deep breath. She whispered a quiet prayer for strength before continuing her day. In a shadowy corner of the cafe, a man in a hoodie and sunglasses sat quietly, sipping a black coffee. The man was none other than Cristiano Ronaldo, the global soccer superstar. Visiting Brookhaven for a charity event, he had come to the cafe seeking a rare moment of anonymity. Ronaldo had witnessed the entire incident. From the moment Martha entered to the way she was treated, he watched with growing discomfort. The humiliation of an elderly woman, a stranger to him, stirred something deep within him. Ronaldo had not forgotten his humble beginnings. Growing up in a poor neighborhood on the island of Madeira, he had seen his fair share of prejudice and unkindness. Watching Martha reminded him of the many times his family had been looked down upon. As Peter returned to his counter, the young couple who took Martha's seat laughed and chatted, oblivious to the pain they had indirectly caused. The other patrons returned to their routines, as though nothing had happened. But Ronaldo couldn't let it go. He took a moment to collect his thoughts, then stood up, his imposing figure immediately drawing attention. He approached the counter, removing his sunglasses. Peter looked up, his annoyance quickly replaced by a forced smile. He had no idea who Ronaldo was, but the man's expensive clothes and confident demeanor suggested someone important. Can I help you? Peter asked, his tone more polite than before. Ronaldo leaned on the counter, his piercing gaze locking onto Peter's. Yes, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'd like to understand why you treated that woman so poorly. Peter blinked, caught off guard. I'm not sure what you mean. The elderly woman you just forced out, Ronaldo clarified. She was a paying customer, wasn't she? Well, yes, but, Peter stammered. But what? Ronaldo interrupted. Did she break any rules? Was she disturbing anyone? Peter opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. She did nothing wrong, Ronaldo continued. Yet you humiliated her. Why? The cafe had gone silent, all eyes on the exchange. Look, we're busy, Peter said defensively. I needed the table. Needed the table? Ronaldo repeated, his voice rising slightly. That woman was there to enjoy a moment of peace. You didn't need the table, you just didn't want her there. Peter flushed. The other patrons exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Ronaldo's words settling over them. The cafe fell silent as Ronaldo's words echoed through the room. Peter fidgeted behind the counter, his usual air of confidence replaced by visible discomfort. The other patrons, many of whom had witnessed the incident, avoided his gaze. Some looked down at their plates, while others exchanged awkward glances, unsure of whether to speak up or remain quiet. Peter cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. Look, he began, his voice wavering, I didn't mean to upset anyone. I'm just running a business here. Sometimes you have to make tough calls. Tough calls? Ronaldo repeated, his tone calm but sharp. There was nothing tough about what you did. That woman paid for her meal, sat quietly, and hurt no one. Yet you treated her as if she didn't belong. That wasn't a business decision, it was prejudice. Peter opened his mouth to argue but stopped. He could feel the weight of Ronaldo's gaze, along with the judgment of the other customers. He realized that no excuse would justify his actions in that moment. I didn't think it was a big deal, Peter muttered, his voice barely audible. Ronaldo shook his head, his expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. It was a big deal to her, he said. And it should be a big deal to you. Treating people with respect and dignity isn't optional, it's the bare minimum we owe each other. The words hit Peter harder than he expected. For the first time, he considered the situation from Martha's perspective. He imagined how she must have felt, being singled out and humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. Ronaldo turned to the other patrons, his voice steady and commanding. And what about all of you? You saw what happened. How many of you spoke up? How many of you said something when you saw an injustice right in front of you? The customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked up, guilt etched on their faces, but no one responded. That's the problem, Ronaldo continued, his voice tinged with frustration. Too many people stay silent. They think, it's not my problem, or, it's not my place to get involved. But silence is complicity. If you see something wrong and do nothing, you're part of the problem. At this, a young woman sitting near the counter spoke up hesitantly. He's right, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I saw what happened, and I didn't say anything. I should have. We all should have. Her words broke the tension, and a few others began nodding in agreement. One older man, a regular at the cafe, cleared his throat and addressed Peter. She's been coming here for years, you know, he said. Martha. She's one of the kindest people I've ever met. Always smiling, always helping others. And you treated her like she didn't matter. That's not right, Peter. Peter looked down, shame washing over him. He had never thought of himself as a bad person, but in that moment, he realized how his actions had betrayed his own values. Ronaldo placed a large sum of cash on the counter, pulling Peter's attention back to him. "This is to cover her meal," he said, "and for whatever you think you lost by having her here. But know this, no amount of money can make up for the way you treated her." Peter nodded slowly, unable to meet Ronaldo's eyes. "You're right," he admitted. "I was wrong. I need to make this right." The cafe remained quiet long after Ronaldo left, his words lingering in the air like an unshakable weight. Peter stood behind the counter, his mind racing. For years, he had justified his actions, brushing off complaints or uncomfortable situations as mere business decisions. But now, faced with the stark truth of his behavior, he realized he had been wrong. The patrons began to leave, some murmuring among themselves about what had just happened. A few regulars approached Peter, their expressions a mix of disappointment and hope. "You've got a chance to make this right, Peter," said Mr. Walker, the older man who had spoken up earlier. "Martha deserves an apology. And more than that, you need to rethink how you treat people." Peter nodded slowly. As the cafe emptied, he locked up early, something he hadn't done in years. He needed time to reflect, to process the events of the morning. That evening, Peter sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He thought about Martha, her kind smile, her quiet dignity, and the way she had walked out of the cafe without a single word of protest. He thought about his late mother, who had taught him to treat everyone with kindness, regardless of their background. How disappointed she would have been to see the man he had become. Peter knew what he had to do. Early the next morning, he baked a batch of fresh croissants himself, something he hadn't done in years, as he usually left the baking to his staff. He also prepared a thermos of tea and packed them carefully in a small basket. He asked around town and found out that Martha often volunteered at the local community center. With the basket in hand, Peter walked to the center, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Martha was in the middle of sorting donations when Peter arrived. She looked up, surprised to see him standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Peter," she said kindly, though there was a hint of caution in her voice. "What brings you here?" Peter took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Martha, I need to apologize," he began. "What I did yesterday was wrong. I was rude, disrespectful, and unfair to you. You deserved so much better, and I'm deeply sorry." Martha studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. "I appreciate you coming to say that," she said. "It takes courage to admit when you've done wrong." Peter nodded, his throat tight. "I brought you some tea and croissants," he said, holding out the basket. "I know it doesn't make up for how I treated you, but I hope you'll accept it as a small gesture of my apology." Martha smiled gently and took the basket. "Thank you, Peter. That's very kind of you." She gestured for him to sit, and they spent the next hour talking. Peter listened as Martha shared stories of her life, her late husband, her years working as a teacher, and her dedication to helping others through volunteer work. For the first time, Peter truly saw her as a person, not just a customer. Back at the cafe, Peter began to make changes. He started by holding a meeting with his staff, sharing what had happened and emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with respect. He also put up a sign near the entrance that read, "All are welcome here." Word of Peter's apology and his efforts to change spread through the town. Slowly, the cafe's reputation improved. Regulars began to notice a warmer atmosphere, and new customers felt welcomed regardless of who they were. Martha, ever gracious, forgave Peter completely. She even returned to the cafe, her presence now a reminder to everyone of the importance of kindness and respect. Peter always greeted her warmly, often offering her a free cup of tea or a fresh pastry. One day, weeks after the incident, Martha was sitting in her usual spot by the window when Peter approached her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about what you said that day," he told her. "About how change takes time. I want you to know that I'm committed to being better, not just for my business but for myself." Martha smiled, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "That's all anyone can ask, Peter." Growth is a journey, not a destination. Far away, Ronaldo heard about Peter's transformation through the media. He smiled to himself, glad to know that his words had made a difference. It wasn't just about confronting prejudice, it was about planting seeds of change, one person at a time. The small cafe on Maple Street became more than just a place to grab coffee. It became a symbol of redemption, a place where people were reminded that everyone, regardless of race, age, or background, deserves respect. Martha continued to sit by the window, her quiet presence a beacon of hope, while Peter worked tirelessly to honor the lesson he had learned: kindness costs nothing but changes everything. Subscribe for more inspirational stories like this. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Thank you for watching my YouTube channel Storytime. Please support me.